All right, how's it going, everybody? So this is going to be the full build guide for my Bleed Bow Snipe Gladiator named Rona Ryrus. And here's some clips to kind of show you a little bit of mapping as well as some solid shaper DPS. So hear those clips and enjoy. All right, and if you're still here, this build looks like something that you want to play, so let's jump into it and go over the character. So here it is, here are the stats. I am currently level 93. Our main two skills are going to be Split Arrow and Puncture. Puncture is built, and this build revolves around the use of the Asylum Cinder Tricorn, which gives us the Snipe skill. And the Snipe skill essentially is a charged channeling skill that allows us to charge up an attack that is socketed into our helmet and unleash it for ridiculous amounts of more damage. So as you can see, it charges up pretty quick. It goes to 6 maximum stages. And once we're at 6 stages, you release it and it hits and inflicts bleed. So for every stage, it gives you 165% more damage with hits and 120% more damage with ailments. That's per stage. So 6 times 120 and 6 times 165% more damage. It's very, very ridiculous. It's very, very strong, and it's very, very fun to play, as you can see from those clips. So all you'll need is an Asylum Tricorn. You can get this from Delirium content. It's the newest one. It's freaking awesome. It's best in slot. This is what enables this build and pushes the traditional Bleed Bow Gladiator to the absolute extreme. Most of this gear I crafted myself, so we'll go over gear real quick, and then we'll go over gem links, and then we'll go over the tree. So I crafted this myself. I decided to go with a Mariketh bow for the more movement speed. You can use a Citadel bow, but the reason I don't use a Citadel bow is the same reason I am not using a Rizlathus coil. I am not a fan, personally, of wide variances in damage. When I hit, I like my damage to be consistent, and I like it to not depend on, oh, well, did I just get unlucky on the rolls? That's not fun and enjoyable for me. You can run a Rizlathus. It is good. But the problem with running a Rizlathus over just a really, really good Stygian is you end up making sacrifices across your other pieces of gear, and you actually end up doing less damage overall, trying to balance your resistances, as opposed to just getting damage on all the gear that you can. So, excuse me. With the Mariketh bow, God, I'm dying. With the Mariketh bow, what we have is 10% increased move speed, which helps with our clear. It's really, really nice. You will, however, be slightly dexterity starved with this character. The big thing with this is you need 220 dexterity or 222 dexterity just to use the bow. And the way that we're pathing, it means that you're going to need some dexterity somewhere, so we'll go over that in a minute. But the main things you're going to prioritize on gear, you need an Elder Bow. As high item level as you can get it, right? Higher item level means better rolls on most things. You want to prioritize getting the bleeding inflicted with this weapon deals 100% more damage. That is your priority on this. That is the stat you want to try and roll. Now, I alt-regaled this. I hit the more damage. I augmented, got the bleed damage. It's T2 bleed damage, but it's still pretty solid. And then I regaled it for bow attacks, fire, and additional arrow. So I got very, very lucky with this. I did do some beast crafting once I hit the bleeding and more damage with bleeding, just to make sure I get it. And I just regaled until I got something I want. So the additional arrow is nice. And then I just multi-modded it to get as much fizz damage as possible. So this ends up being a pretty solid bow. And I've cleared all content except Uber Elder. This thing handles Cyrus like crazy. Super smooth. Very, very nice. And then, of course, we have our center tricorn. The rolls on this really don't matter all that much. The more evasion rating is probably the only thing you want to focus on because we are doing RT, so the accuracy doesn't matter. As far as the rest of your gear, most of this stuff, as you can tell, is going to be hunter influence, and that is because of the synergy with the physical damage over time multiplier, faster damage with bleeds, etc. that the hunter influenced items give you. So I crafted this myself as well. You want to prioritize the physical damage over time multiplier, life, and then as much other stats as possible. But those are the two things you really want to prioritize. You don't have to have this on a broadhead. It is nice, but it is not 100% required. You can also, any base that has a good physical damage over time roll with some life is going to be what you want, right? This is just a little bit extra. Penetrating quivers are also very nice because it gives you some free pierce, which if you get enough pierce, you don't have to run a pierce setup in your split arrow, and you can put another damage jewel or damage gem in there, rather. So that is the quiver. The amulet, I also crafted this myself. Again, you want the physical damage over time multiplier, physical damage to attacks, and life. Anything extra on this is just extra and nice. If you want to help a little bit more with the dexterity stat, you can run a turquoise amulet with a hunter base of at least item level 80 or 82. I don't remember. I'd have to look at the POB, but as high item level over 83 or up, that way you're covered. To get the, instead of the strength and intelligence that you get on an agate, you can do dexterity intelligence, and that helps with your gearing a little bit. But fizz damage over time, fizz damage to attacks, life. Rings, I crafted these myself as well. I recommend vermilion rings. You can do steel rings, but the bases are much more expensive. I alt-regaled this as well, and then just slammed it just for the lulz. Because I had an open prefix and I wasn't going to craft another prefix on, so I just slammed it anyway. But fizz damage to attacks, damage with bleeding, and bleeding duration is a Warlord's modifier. It's very, very good. And then life, and then I'm putting minimum endurance charges anywhere I can, and I'll explain that later. So that is the ring. This one I was playing around trying to use an Awakener's Orb to get projectile attack damage and the vulnerability from a Redeemer for the projectile attack damage and vulnerability for the Warlords. I smashed them together. I rolled melee damage and projectile attack damage, which is hilarious to me, so I'm using that right now. I will probably try and re-roll another one of these to get attack damage, vulnerability, and a better life roll and some other stats and stuff like that. But overall, pretty solid ring. Boots, we're using a pair of two-tones, and again, you're prioritizing the bleeding you inflict deals damage faster, which is the hunter modifier for your boots, and then just getting as much life resistance and move speed as possible. I rolled this with a good cold resistance roll, so I decided to keep that, and then just roll move speed and onslaught onto it, which is pretty sweet. I also crafted my own Stygian Vise, and then just hit it with as much of the resistance quality as I could. Really, really solid belt. I just alt-regaled this, got lucky on a good T2 resistance regal with an open suffix. So I got really lucky on this. You can craft this yourself. I wouldn't recommend buying something like this because belt is very expensive. Just craft it yourself, right? Get something that can farm, and any Stygian with a little bit less life and a little bit less resistances will also work, right? You're going to scale up your character. So you're not going to start off in maps with your end game gear, right? You slowly, incrementally build it up. This is what you kind of want to build towards. So a little bit less life, a little bit less resistances, you're going to be okay, because as you can see, we're sitting at about 6.1k life, which is very, very good. And anything over like 5.2 is going to feel pretty comfortable just going through Delirium content. I also crafted these myself. you're prioritizing again the physical damage over time, multiplier, phys damage, and life. And then I just slammed dexterity and then slammed it again just for the lulls and actually got increased dexterity. So these are very, very good. But overall, in a pair of gloves, just as much physical damage over time, multiplier, life, phys damage to attacks on a pair of grip gloves is going to be your best in slot because of the projectile attack damage scaling our hits. So that's chest armor. This thing is absolutely insane. Again, you do not need something this ridiculous because as you can see, we are still way overcapped on our resistances by like anywhere from 30 to 50 resistances overall. So even if I take this off, as you can see, the only resistance that we're really short on is fire resistance. So with all your other gear, even a ring that doesn't have much resistance on it, you can still easily cap your resistances. So you don't need something that insane as far as resistances in life. I would recommend an astral plate and then just get as much life and resist on it as possible. Flask, we're just running a bleed flask, freeze movement speed flask. I do recommend a cinder swallow because this is very, very helpful. You activate it, and then every time you kill something, it gives you life mana back when you kill. And then I unveiled it and just got the damage taken from hits as leached as life during effect. So it's a really good survivability tool because there is lots of weird on death effects with the delirium content. You will get vapped occasionally, so use this. It helps kind of balance it out. Armor flask, just with as much armor as possible. Again, we're armor based, not evasion based for this character, just because it's easier to path that way, and the gearing is a lot easier when you're armor. And then you don't have to worry about just getting straight up one shot randomly. That's very, very frustrating. Evasion is great until it's not and you're dead, right? So having a little bit of physical damage mitigation and also the passive dodging from your dash and moving around and being really fast kind of helps keep you alive, and this helps while you're mapping. Because if you're fighting any kind of endgame content, Cyrus, Shaper, Uber Elder, whatever, if you're going to get one shot, you're going to get one shot, right? And the same goes for getting one shot with evasion. So you're using your dash, you're dodging around. So I found that armor is a little bit more useful because it gives you that mitigation because you are going to be hit. It's just going to happen. The delirium content is what it is. So I prefer armor base. And then lastly, we're running a mana flask with the flask effect is not removed at full mana, just to kind of help keep us topped off. You don't really need this. You can swap this out for sulfur flask or some other flask if you would like. A dying sun, not really necessary on the dying sun, but it is what it is. So those are the flasks. That is the gear. Let's go over the tree real quick. Here, let me go over the skills. So you can pause this to kind of see what our sheet is. Our total defense, miscellaneous shenanigans, and then charges. And then here is our puncture. For the same reason, feel free to pause the video if you would like. Boom, boom. Okay, so let's look at the passive tree real quick. So we are a gladiator. As far as priorities for your ascendancies, you want to run down through gratuitous violence and then grab arena challenger, and then outmatch and outlast is going to be your last one that you pick up. This one's not super great. It's situationally useful while you're mapping, but unless you can fully maintain your frenzy charges with this and then fully maintain your endurance charges, is why we're using minimums. So once we get up to 3 minimums, we're at our maximum endurance charges and we get the physical damage reduction. So that's the route that we're taking for that. Not a bad node. The more damage while at maximum is nice. The reduced damage while at maximum is nice. So you can take that. But through gratuitous violence, this is all your bleed and your explosions. And then arena challenger is a more multiplier. And we are running sand stance constantly to keep that procced. We don't ever switch over to blood stance because you're melting things anyway, as you can see from the clips at the beginning of the video. So those are our ascendancies. We came down. Originally, I pathed straight down across here. This is what I used to fill out my dexterity, and then I ended up picking up a jewel socket. I spec'd out of this later, but when you start off, you'll want to come down and go across and go up this way. As far as cluster jewels, we'll touch on that real quick. Just kind of let you view the tree. You'll be able to look at the nodes and go into specifics if you want to know what each node is. But mainly we're just picking up all the bleed that we can, all the life, all the survivability, and then focusing on grabbing point blank, because again, that's more damage. You stand in front of something, it gives you more damage on top of your more damage, on top of your snipe, on top of your more damage. It just scales absolutely out of control. So that's really nice. And then we pick up Iron Reflexes because of a lot of our gear is evasion based. So we want to make sure to convert that to armor. And it's one node. So it gives you a lot of physical damage reduction. Now we do come up over here and pick up 2 full sets of cluster jewels. And what you want to prioritize on your larges is you want anything 10 and below is going to be fine. It's not really going to affect how many points you use because of the way that the circles are kind of laid out. So 10 and below, 9 and below, you don't need to go for 8s with specific, search for 8, because when you get down to that, they're more expensive, but you just don't allocate the point. So this is essentially an 8 wheel without having to take the point anyway. So on this, you want to get the physical damage large clusters. You want to have 2 jewel sockets, and pretty much anything on the large cluster jewels is going to be very, very, very strong. I went with Force Multiplier and Iron Breaker because Force Multiplier, again, is just double damage, fizz damage, and physical damage reduction from your hits and fizz damage. So these are really forgiving. As long as you have 2 jewel sockets, you can kind of have any of the fizz rolls. They're all pretty solid. Just as much fizz damage as possible, and Force Multiplier, I'd say probably try and prioritize. As far as the medium cluster jewels, on these, there's actually a little caveat that I want to tell you guys about. So you want to focus on, God, my mouse sucks. You want to focus on getting the physical damage over time multipliers. You actually want more passives on your medium jewels, and here's why. So each node, each small passive gives you 5% physical damage over time multiplier, which is usually, traditionally, very, very hard to get on the tree. There's only like 2 or 3 wheels that have fizz damage over time multiplier, so it's very, very, very valuable. It ramps your damage like crazy. This is a more multiplier for our bleeds, which is crazy. So when you have a 4-socket one, all you're getting is 5 physical damage over time multiplier. That's it. You're getting 5, your 2 notables, and your socket, right? If you get one that has 6, you're actually getting 15% physical damage over time multiplier, which is very, very efficient for this build. So you actually want to get 6 passives on these if you can. As many passives as possible, because you still get your 2 keystones, and then you actually get 15 for your jewel socket instead of 5 for your jewel socket. So this gives you 10% more damage for your bleeds for 2 points, which is huge. As far as the notables, Rend, Wasting Affliction, Vivid Hues, and Exposure Therapy, those are going to be the ones that you're going to want to try and prioritize. You definitely want Vivid Hues on at least 2 of your jewels because it is very, very strong. It gives you a lot of leech because you're constantly hitting bleeding things. It helps with sustainability. It helps keep you alive during mapping. And it helps you kind of leech through those dumb on-death effects that will just absolutely rip you to shreds if you get hit by too many of them. So you're constantly killing, you're constantly bleeding, you're constantly leeching. And Vivid Hues also has one of the highest damage over time multipliers for bleeding on any of the keystones, so you definitely want to prioritize that. That, Rend, Wasting Affliction, and Exposure Therapy are going to be really, really strong. Exposure Therapy is really nice because most of the time when chaos stuff is killing you, it's from a dot, unless you're getting hit with like snakes or something like that, but there's not a lot of upfront bap you chaos damage. Most of it is poison or dot related, and this helps tremendously with that. As far as your small clusters, you're going to want to go with as many passives, again, as possible for getting more life, right? The 2 passives are nice, but I recommend grabbing 3 passives just for another life roll. And then any kind of resistances, these are really malleable. You can use these to pretty much do whatever you want. Fill out your attributes, get a little bit more all res, etc., etc. Just roll them. Anything as far as the small clusters, notables are going to be good. Fettle is probably best in slot, but anything that gives you 8 to 10 maximum life is going to be really, really solid. But again, Fettle is going to be BIS. But rolling those can be a bit of a pain in the butt. So I got lucky and got some all res, chaos res on some of these, or all res and regen. Decided just to keep those because they do just fine. Same thing up here. As much regen, and I got Surging Vitality on this. This is also a really, really nice one if you want to prioritize that. Again, just kind of helps passively keep you alive. And then I got Fettle rolled on this one with some Int and then Flat Life. So those are the cluster jewels you want to prioritize. Large physical, medium physical damage over time, and the life small passives. So we are taking RT, so you don't need to worry about accuracy or anything like that. We're not focusing on crit because scaling bleeds with crit doesn't really make a difference. And this is the most efficient tree that I have come up with at the moment. Saves you the most point. This is a weird kind of 3-point right here, but this gives you 1, 2, 3 points. So this also gives you 30% projectile damage. So you can come down over here and save 1 point, but I found that the projectile damages is nicer to take. So this is the only kind of clunky area of the tree. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Bleed, resistances, life, armor, etc. come up here. As far as jewel sockets go, these are really, really versatile. As you're gearing your character, you can kind of make these whatever you want. Use your jewel sockets to really fill out your attributes, your character, your life. Get a little damage on them if you can. While you're leveling, it makes gearing a lot easier. So ideally, you'd want something like this: global fizz damage over time, and life. These are not that expensive. This is only like 20 or 30 chaos a piece, and you only have a couple of them, so not a big deal. But while you're leveling, while you're trying to get both jewel sockets and get everything set up, it does make gearing your character easier to help use your jewel sockets to kind of fill out whatever you're missing, right? And you can get life, fizz damage, attribute jewels for relatively cheap, so I would recommend doing that. As far as our amulet, our anoint, we did allocate deadly draw because this saves us 4 points coming up this way and taking this. A lot of people will say, oh, we'll just allocate cleaving. The 50% faster is very, very nice. However, that's the only thing that's on there, right? The rest of the node is useless. So I opted to save 4 points on here and take deadly draw, which still gives you the 15% faster. So you're losing a little bit of faster multiplier for your bleeds, but as you can see from the clips at the beginning of the video, it's absolutely bananas anyway. This is just more efficient points wise. If you have a few points or you're higher level than I am, you can just allocate the cleaving for the 15% more and path down over here. But again, not super required. I opted to go with this, and it's been working out just fine. The Rizlathas, again, the issue with using Rizlathas is it only has life on it, and it also has a lesser multiplier, right? Like I mentioned a minute ago, I don't like that kind of variance in my damage because of how Snipe works. You're planting your feet to charge up an attack. It charges up pretty fast, but when you're dealing with an endgame boss like Shaper or Cyrus or Uber Elder, there's going to be some windows, and you need to take advantage of those windows to dish out as much damage as humanly possible. And getting a bad roll with Rizlathas when you're trying to dodge around and charge up attacks in certain instances, and then having it do no damage because you roll the less multiplier on the Rizlathas and you hit a low end using a Citadel bow, I do not enjoy that. You can use Rizlathas, but it means you end up making sacrifices in other pieces of your gear. You start prioritize, okay, well, I won't get physical damage over time multiplier in this because I have to fill out my resistances, etc. So I opted just for a Stygian because of that reason. Rizlathas is still viable. You can use it, but it just means you'll make sacrifices elsewhere in your gear, and your damage won't be as consistent, which is something that bugs me. So that's why I'm not using it. You will also see a lot of people using the Thread of Hope. You can use that, but again, like, you maintain your frenzies pretty solid with Blood Rage, and then using minimum endurance charges on your jewelry. I only have one rolled right now because I'm still rebalancing my resistances to make sure everything works, and I want to re-roll this, so I eventually will craft a minimum endurance charge on this and a minimum endurance charge on this, and that will give me my max, which will give me my 10% reduction. So I prefer going that route and just sacrificing one modifier on my rings, just one suffix, and that means I save 2 points and I get a jewel socket back, and I don't get the minus res that you get from Thread of Hope. So that's why I use that. But that's overall, that's the build, you guys. You saw how it is at the beginning of the video. If you enjoy it, if you have any questions, please let me know. I've been playing this build a lot. I will be more than happy to answer them. I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks for watching. And before we go, we'll just go over the cosmetics. I'm using mostly Doom Guard stuff for those of you that care about that, and using the Delirium horns. So there's the cosmetics, there's the build, there's the stuff. Auras, we are, before I forget, auras, we are running Pride and Flesh and Stone, and we are not taking Flesh and Stone out of Sand Stance because You just don't need to. And as you're mapping, you more than maintain your challenger charges. And then once you get to a boss, you kill it before you run out of your challenger charges. So it's very, very efficient. And then we also are running Molten Shell. One thing before I forget, I wanted to make sure to bring up ensnaring arrow is a very, very important thing. So as far as gems, again, we're going puncture, awaken deadly ailments, awaken vicious projectiles, and brutality in our helmet for our puncture setup. Split arrow, we are running split arrow, pierce, maim, vicious proj, brutality, and deadly ailments. And again, you can take the awakened versions of this, but as you can see from the video at the beginning, you really don't need that. It just very much so carries, and your bleeds just kind of do work. In our chest, we're just running Plied, Enlighten, Portal, and Flesh and Stone. We're just using that for our auras. Dash, you definitely want to link it with second wind support. This makes your dash very, very efficient to use. You can pretty much always dash around. You almost always have charges, and it's just very, very good. Gets you out of the way and keeps you moving so you're not getting killed. Blood Rage, I just have it set on my control, so you just control T and you get your Blood Rage, and as you can see, we're almost perfectly capped out, and you can see that 10% over 1 second quickly zipping us back up from our jewels. Molten Shell, Val Molten Shell, this is a really big survivability thing, gives you a bunch of armor. As you can see, when we have it up, what is it for? It gives us another like 3,000, 4,000 armor, which is really, really nice. And then when we have our Val Molten Shell, it goes up even more. So those are our setups for the ensnaring arrow, like I was about to mention. A lot of times, if you look on PoE Ninja, you will see people running this with a ballista totem. I hate that, because the ballista totems, you set them down and they don't go anywhere. They just stay there. So if you're trying to map and you're just coming up against some really chunky rares and you don't want to snipe them, this helps tremendously. I have it linked with Mirage Archer, faster attacks, and then greater multiple projectiles. This way, as you're mapping, you just shoot out your ensnaring arrow instead of your split arrow, and your Stygian is constantly ensnaring and shooting stuff all around you, which just makes your mapping experience exponentially smoother. I recommend doing this. You can do a totem, but totems suck. I mean, it's just they're not fun to play. It makes the build clunky, and Mirage Archer is just ridiculous. So anyway, that's actually the end for reals this time. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any questions, and see you next time.